Hey y'all, welcome to our first video in our intersection of design series. Basically, we're going to spend this time exploring how your team can work together better and different ways that the contractors that you may or may not hire can collaborate so that your business and your brand looks even better and works and functions even better than it has before. So I'm joined today by Latasha. She is my copywriter for the Design Lab, but I know that we also work on a bunch of different clients together, and she has many clients of her own. So Latasha, hello, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. So I'm Latasha. I own Uncanny Content, and we're a full service content and copy agency. Basically what that means is we help clients with everything from blogs and social media to things like web copy, sales pages, and stuff like that. From the content planning to the execution and delivery sort of perspective. So everything that people need to get their content out, we help with, except for design.
But I think that's huge, is that you start with content planning to begin with. You're not just kind of taking assignments as they come, and you can really dictate what is going to be most helpful.
Yeah, and it's incredibly helpful for the clients too, because they're usually at a loss for what to say or what to post that would have the most impact for their audience. So we always start with that kind of strategy in mind to say, what are people really wanting to hear from you, and how can we kind of plan this in a way that flows into things like launches or events that you have coming up, so that everything is organically, we call it the waterfall, instead of just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. So
I like the idea of the waterfall because a lot of it does feel really stilted, I feel, when I work with some copywriters, when there's not that communication between what's happening and the overall business.
Yeah, it's very siloed. Usually with most copywriters, it's I only do web copy or I only do sales copy, and then they don't take the time to get to know the content ecosystem. And that is usually where things kind of get disjointed. So you go to a sales page and you're like, this is awesome, but then you visit their website and you're like, that is not the same language, or that's not the same vibe. So yeah, it's definitely, it's nice to have that strategy in mind from the get-go.
Yeah, that's one of my pet peeves, is when I don't get to see, when I on board with a client and I don't get to see everything that's going on with their business. I think that a lot of people say, oh, I'll just hand my designer assignments as they come. And that's obviously totally acceptable. And if that works for your business, and then it works. But there's so much context that is missing, where a designer can come in and say, hey, we can do this even better, or I can work with these team members if you would just introduce me to them and tell me who I'm dealing with.
Yeah, definitely. I think that that's pretty common too in the online business space, is people hire contractors and they assume, well, I have to direct this, and I have to direct this, and I have to direct this, when really it can be a more linear process across the team,
100%.
Even if they are contractors.
Exactly. Even if they're contractors, they can still be a part of your team. Okay, so I kind of think of everything as a designer as falling under a branding bubble, which sometimes I have trouble with, because I think branding is like a buzzword that people don't identify with anymore.
Yeah.
But what does that mean to you then? What does branding mean to you?
Yeah. So when we start with a client, I always talk about the content planning, but we're also thinking about it from the perspective of, what does your business offer that nobody else does? Or how do you do this in a way that nobody else does it? And that to me is branding. And that it's not just like, I think when we think of branding, we think of the visuals, but really to me, it's the differentiator. It's what is your unique value in this market, and what do you do differently than anybody else does?
That is how I approach it too, which is probably why we get along so well.
And I think just being aware of what that brand is, I think it's so valuable, like across team members, across people who support your brand, because if they understand, like, this is the brand, this is what we do, beyond, even like the mission, vision, values, stuff like that. If like, this is the way that our brand looks, talks, feels, all this stuff, it affects every touch point. So it affects customer service, it affects, how your brand looks on social, it affects your sales copy, things like that. But it really helps to have that root of, like, this is what we do different everywhere.
Yes, I always say, like, make the biggest thing in design, but that's true across your entire business. Like, take your brand, take what makes you different, and apply it to literally every single avenue, every single touch point, and every single team member, and every single job.
Yeah.
Okay. So then how do you find a brand voice?
Well, so for our clients specifically, they usually have done some work just because we do work with people who are maybe a little bit more established or they've worked with a copywriter before. So they have done some like brand voice exercises, or they've been doing this long enough that they're like, this is my brand voice and I know that. But we do get some people who are like, I don't know. I don't know my butt from my elbow when it comes to my brand voice. So usually when that happens, we go through an exercise. We have a specific exercise we give people that has them walk through how their brand sounds, how their brand feels, and then we kind of talk through words that they don't love. And those three things kind of help us hone in on what that brand voice is. So when we talk about how your brand sounds, usually people are a lot more conversational than they come across in writing. So they have a hard time because they're like, well, I'm so much more excited about what I do, but when I write, it sounds like I'm lecturing somebody or whatever it may be. So we talk about how your voice sounds, your brand voice sounds, and then how you want people to feel when they come to you or when they read your stuff or when they look at your website. And that kind of helps us hone in on, usually people want to be welcoming and inviting, but there's also some people who want people to laugh or who want people to think when they leave the website. So that kind of helps us hone in on that as well. And then we talk about things that they hate seeing in other people's copy or that they've done in their own copy. And they're like, and this hurt my chest, but I felt like I had to, or I didn't know how to edit it.
Yeah.
And again, that kind of buffers us. I call them like the bowling alley bumpers, like they say it's for kids, but I still use them, whatever. But it helps you like buffer closer to where you want to go. So eventually you can hit that like middle pin and get a strike, hopefully.
Oh, I like the metaphor.
I just bounce when I go bowling. It's all about the angle.
It's all about the angle. Okay, that's really helpful to me because, and that's one of those things where, again, I always stress to clients, if you have information from your copywriter, if you have a brand voice, if you have literally anything defined for your business, pass it on to me. Because if someone says that they have like a really conversational voice and then I get copy from them and I don't know that, then it informs how I choose which words and which phrases to pull out. Or I could say, okay, I have this sales copy, but your conversational voice is missing from it. Can I ask your designer for something else? Or can I ask them for like something that I think is so easy as like little badges or little circles with fun little phrases or fun little words that you could pull out here or there. And having that communication between the copywriter and designer, I feel, is where that magic happens, because then I can help fill in the blanks if something got lost in translation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that that's really valuable from a design perspective to have that, especially if the client or project outsources work to somebody for something very specific. So a lot of people outsource to sales copywriters specifically, so sales page writers, and they do a great job of, voice of customer and maybe finding testimonials and all of that, but there could still be that one little touch point that feels lost in the copy. And that could be something that you as the designer and the client can say, hey, one of our biggest brand feels is ease. Like we want people to feel ease when they're reading this. And right now it feels a little bit harsh, or it feels like there's a lot more involved here than we really want people to feel like. And those tweaks are always valuable to the copywriter because they should be able to go back through and revise with that in mind. And it does advise design too, because if we're talking about a brand voice that you want people to feel ease when they're there, that's going to influence how you build the flow of that page, versus somebody who's a little bit more like sarcastic or witty. It's going to be a little bit more punchy, and there's going to be different things in there that draw the eye. Yeah, it definitely matters a lot to have those things defined. And if you don't have them defined, I would really recommend you do that. Even if you don't work with a professional, I think it just really helps.
I totally agree. And I think one of those things that's missing is sometimes you know it in your head, and unless you have someone to present you with what you think it should be, you can't edit afterward. So sometimes we just have to see it and then say, okay, let's go back and tweak and let's make this an iterative process.
Yeah, for sure. And I think just kind of speaking from how we work together, usually when I write sales page copy or web copy that I know you're going to see, I leave comments in there and I'm like, hey, I want to have this here, but it might need to move based on how the page flows, or how you feel like we need to pull out a certain part of this paragraph, you know, like we're saying the badges, or I'll always say like, can we make this pop? Like every designer's favorite term, can we make this pop? But having that conversation with each other to just make sure that you're actually reflecting that brand voice and the branding, like what makes people different is so, the pairing is really important. So that conversation is really important as well.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things that you do is you leave me little comments, which I sometimes feel like, I don't know if other copywriters don't do this because maybe they feel like they're stepping on toes. Like I'm not going to appreciate it, but I love when you do that. And something else that you do that I love is you give me lots of options. Like you'll write a couple different headings and a couple different subheadings because it obviously like communicates something different every time, but it gives me options of words that I can choose to pull out or things that might just look better on a page.
Yeah. And I don't think other copywriters do that unless they have a designer that they partner with actively, because I do think it's that stepping on the toes thing. Like they're afraid to say like, hey, I'd love to see this happen. I don't have that issue because my biggest thing is I want the client's project to look as good as possible. So I don't really care. But yeah, I think that that's something that other copywriters, like if they're watching this, can adopt, because it is so important to have that conversation with like, I want to make sure that this gets reflected in the best way possible. So let's work together on this kind of thing.
Yes, that's something that I think business owners should know too, is to leave in some room to let your people collaborate. Like something that we're working on right now is my website copy. And we started the project saying, okay, I'm going to just create a general sitemap and an outline of the points that I want to hit. And then you took it and you wrote all this copy, which was awesome. And then I said, now that I have this copy, I'm going to actually put it into the design and see if there are things that are missing or if things that need to be cut. And now we have this process where we're going back and forth and making copy edits like constantly and design edits constantly. It's not just a one and done thing. Like I wrote the copy, I'm done.
Yeah. And I think that that's probably one of my biggest frustrations with copywriters and designers outside of us, is that it's a one and done is what it feels like. So there's like that structure around here, you got these pages, you approve the copy, bye. And the designers too, where it's like, hey, this is the design, you had your 2 rounds of edits or whatever, and we're done, bye. And I think that to some extent, like, yes, whatever your scope is, keep that in mind, but also knowing that like, if you have that ability to work with somebody, it's not going to be a 2-round revision sort of thing. And it doesn't mean that either one of you screwed up, right? Like it doesn't mean that like, oh, your copywriter sucks or your designer sucks. It literally just means we're trying to make these 2 things work together in the best way possible. And it's, again, like you're getting closer and closer and closer until you're like, that's it, that's the home run.
Exactly. It goes back to your bowling pin bumper metaphor. Like it just keeps getting narrower and narrower, and then you hit the strike. And that's good.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you wish designers knew about your process?
I think there is a delineation for me in my experience between designers who are new and designers who have a little bit more experience. And it's, again, that confidence to come to me and say, hey, I want to do this with this. So especially with social, that's the biggest thing that I do on a daily basis. And I'll leave the designer prompts to say like, hey, this is going to be a graphic. Hey, let's just do an image here. And there's a difference between like a seasoned designer and somebody who needs a little bit more guidance. And I'm not a designer. I don't think in visuals. I can barely match on a daily basis. So it's really hard for me as a non-designer to kind of give that direction, but I know how necessary it is. So I've had to like study things and get more used to giving the designers guidance if they are a little bit greener around the gills. I don't even know what that means when I think it means, but whatever. A little green, a little new, versus a seasoned designer who comes in and they're like, okay, I want to do this. And they'll like take it and run with it. And then there's the revision process, right? So like I need to typo edit, or, hey, I actually wanted this to just be one graphic instead of a carousel, whatever it may be. But there's that iterative collaboration versus direction. And I wish that, I know that it takes time, it takes experience, but I do wish that more new designers really worked to think through leveraging the copy you're given and putting it into a design of your own making, because I do think that the way the designers' brains work, you guys have this like amazing ability to turn these things into visuals that like I never in a million years could have thought of. And I think that just having that confidence to play around and show the copywriter or the client, like, hey, this is what I think would be really cool. And give that, like, lead the conversation and kind of present your ideas in that way. I think I wish more designers did. And I think that, again, the biggest thing is just collaborating. Like, it's not you deliver something and you're done, or if you have edits, it means you're a trash designer. It's again, the goal is to just do the best by the client.
Yes, totally agreed there. And I also want to just like underline the point that collaboration doesn't have to happen immediately. Like, obviously you have to build a rapport with someone, but
right.
I mean, I'll just give an example. You and I have worked together for years, but up until this year, we had one client in particular where I was just taking a lot of your direction, and we were working on the social feed and making sure that it looked good. And it wasn't until a couple months ago where I was like, something's not clicking. I think we need to reapproach this entire process. And like, we would need to redefine what some of these templates look like. And we need to look at our content buckets and figure out how best to represent a specific content bucket through design. And so it doesn't always have to happen immediately. And sometimes it just takes going through that process for a while before you're like, this isn't working.
Yeah, and I think from the design perspective, again, that's what I mean by like leading that conversation, because as a writer, I'm not going to know those things. Like, I'm going to know that I have content buckets. Like, I want to, write these things and these things and these things on a, cycling basis. But the design part of it, I'm just like, yeah, that looks cool. I like it. And the client might not either. So again, taking that initiative to just say like, hey, these are my skill sets, and I really want to show you guys that like, there's something not clicking here, or there's something we could be doing even better. I want more designers to kind of take that lead. I think that would be awesome.
Yes, that's something that we're working on in our team, as well as defining what some of our design values are. And one of them is to take the lead and to take it to completion and to iterate. So like, and you see me do this all the time when I design graphics for you, is you might give me a line of copy and I might tweak something, or I might like rearrange a sentence.
Oh yeah.
Or I'll like pull out a URL instead of keeping it in a sentence because it looks better as a button. Like little things that amplify the design that don't actually hurt the intent of what's being said or the copy. And then obviously flagging it when you turn it back in and saying, I tweaked this, is it okay?
Yeah. Well, just typo editing, I think, is the biggest thing there. But I think that designers need to understand that like copywriters are going to trust you. Like, they're going to say, here are the bones of what we want to say, or here's what I think we should say. But again, it's like somebody telling me to write web copy. I'm not going to listen to the client tell me exactly how to write the homepage. Like, I'm going to do it the way that I know this needs to be done, because it's my job to do it well. But I know that takes time and a little bit of confidence building and all of that. So
that's exactly it. Yeah. But coming in knowing that everyone, like you said, is just trying to do the best for the client and making sure that everything looks and sounds exactly as it should. That's the goal for anyone, whether or not you're starting out or you've been in the business for
absolutely.
Yeah. I think my biggest takeaway, especially having worked with you for so long, is that design is not just design. Like, I have to have copy with it. The two things are not separate to me. Like, we have to be working together constantly. We have to be making sure that what I think of as the brand also matches up with what you think of as the brand.
Absolutely. And I think too, just that conversation of almost challenging each other. So I think we do this really well with one of our clients, and then also working on your brand of like, hey, can we make this a little bit more whatever the brand is? Like, can we take this to the next level with that? Sorry, my cat is yelling at me.
Really had to just butt in and say an opinion.
She has a lot of them, yeah. But I think that just having that push and pull kind of direction with each other, not to challenge each other, not to be like, you're not doing this right or you're not doing this enough. It's to say, I think that's part of why it's so cool to work with somebody like this, is that you get that chance to really go deep and to really find new ways to bring out your clients' ideas in a way that like I never would have thought of in a million years, because I don't have your skills. And that, you know, you never would have maybe structured that sentence in that way to make it like that much more punchy or whatever it may be.
Yes.
You know, and I think that the whole idea that like neither one of us is perfect at both. So it requires both of us to make the work perfect, or as close to perfect as it's possible to ever get. I just think that that part is really, really cool. And I just wish more people would lean into that, because there's so much more fun there. You know what I mean? With this like exploration and the exchanging of ideas, I think is just really, really fun.
I totally agree. Also, working with you is like one of the best things that's ever happened to me.
Oh, don't make me cry on video.
We can have a whole different conversation about how team members, especially like contracted team members, should be working closer together and like functioning as a single unit. But yeah, I totally agree with you.
I also think that goes back to the like confidence and leading with like your expertise sort of conversation though, because it took me a long time to feel like I could actually go to you on like our first client together. I was like terrified to go to you because I didn't want you to feel like I was critiquing you or like inserting information that you maybe already covered.
Yes.
But I think that it just comes with time and working with people who have the client's best interests at heart, because there are some contractors who are just in and out and they don't care. But
we don't
I think, you know, no, we don't.
Yes.
It just comes with time and finding people that you really like working with.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think sometimes, I know in the past I felt like, oh, I don't want to reach out because I don't want to say it's not my responsibility, but I didn't want to go over a business owner's head. And I didn't want to assume like any kind of leadership role that they might have taken offense to. But I think something that I've learned over the past few years, just working with so many different clients, is they want you to take as much off their plate as possible. So just do it.
Yep. And I think too, like it could be a team meeting, or you could go to that client and say, hey, I really want to talk to our copywriter about this. Are you okay with that? And I think just getting that permission gives you a little bit of that confidence boost. And then you can say, hey, I talked to the client and we talked about this, and I'd love to talk to you about this idea. What do you think? But it can be scary the first couple of times you do it. But it's been like one of the most validating things for me is finding people on client teams who are so good at what they do that we can collaborate, we can take new ideas and test them out and see what it looks like. And that would never happen if you didn't at least try.
So true. I have had clients before where I have thought, this is not a sustainable way to work. I don't know if we can work together anymore. But all it took was me saying, can I hop on a meeting with all of your other team members? And that literally changed everything. Just having that communication open and like being able to say, I'm having this issue. Is anyone else having this issue? How can we solve it together, instead of not being able to solve it at all, or taking it to someone like a business owner whose plate is completely overflowing? That changes it all.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think too, it's just that when you're able to connect with the whole team, it helps to know who the team is and what their roles are. I don't think a lot of business owners communicate that very well to their contractors. And it's okay if you're like, hey, I have questions about how this team works. It's okay. You know, like they're going to be like, yeah, here's all the information you need to know. How can I help you help me?
Yes.
But yeah, sometimes clients are a bit of a hot mess, and it's not their fault. It's just that they're busy. And so our job is being the best service provider we can be, is making sure that we bridge that gap in the ways that are in, you know, our lane. You don't want to be like overstepping too much, but it's okay to ask and to kind of insert yourself.
Exactly. Never know unless you try.
Exactly.
Well, thanks, Latasha. Is there anything else that you feel like I missed or that people should definitely know?
I have one question for you.
Oh, okay.
Which comes first, copy or design?
I am going to cheat with this answer and say it needs to be marketing strategy.
Okay. I see. That's one of the biggest questions that I get when people are talking to me about web copy specifically, is, oh, my designer said that copy has to come first. And then I've talked to other copywriters who are like, no, there has to be at least a site map ready for me, things like that. So I always wonder about that in terms of working like designer and copywriter together. I think the way that we work together is maybe different than how other people work. So I was just kind of curious how you see that working on other teams or with clients you've worked with in the past.
Yeah, that is a really good question, because I would say like the ideal situation is that both of us are in like a big launch meeting or something together, and we can say, oh, we're kind of agreeing on this big vision.
Yeah.
And then we can talk to each other and say, do you feel like you need to start first or that I need to start first? Especially because I feel like some of the best ideas I feel like are just people saying, oh, what if we just did this? And it could be a designer saying, what if we just did like a cool giveaway, or what if we just did a cool like poster that people could print and share? Or it could be a copywriter saying, I really think that this like specific tagline is like fire. And so that's kind of why I feel like it depends, because I think the best ideas determine what the workflow should be. But I will say that I don't think that everything should start with copy, because we don't know the container that things live in. And unless we can agree on that, like what's the platform? What are we trying to say? How quickly do we need to say it? I don't know. I go back and forth on this. I always start with some kind of web map, and then I get copy.
I will say that's been super wonderful for me, mostly because I can see, like you said, the size of the container. So like if there's like a side-by-side, so like an image and a copy block, I'm not going to write 2 paragraphs to put there. I'm going to write 2 or 3 sentences. Versus if you got that copy and I wouldn't know how you wanted to format it, I would be like, okay, well, here's a paragraph, but we can cut it up if we need to. And that always, it's possible. I do it all the time because my clients do have very siloed, like, hey, you were referred by this designer, but you're not going to see the design until the day goes live, kind of thing. But it is so nice to not have to worry about how that's going to transfer in design, because at least I know, like, okay, if we have a side-by-side and then we're going to have a big header block, I know I need to pull out a sentence there that's going to really look good, not just a middle of a paragraph sentence that wasn't intended to be a header, you know? But things like that do happen. So I don't know. I'm always curious about how designers see it, because I've heard so many people say, you know, copy comes first and design comes first. And I think the way we do it is the right way.
So too.
Yeah, that was my only question for you.
I will go a little bit more in depth to say that the way we do it, I do a sitemap that says generally what sections are going in each page. Like we need a big hero thing. We need a little bit about a bio and a little bit about, you know, the problem that we're solving. And then you'll come back and say, we actually need to add this or we need to rearrange. And it's just like a very loose outline. And then from there, I do a wireframe, which is where I get to put in like cool sections like, oh, let's do like a big infographic here, or a bunch of icons here, or like just a huge quote here. And then you can kind of fill in the blanks that way. Because some of the cool things that you can think to do only happen when you see the full design in front of you.
Yeah. And I think too, just seeing the way that the page flows. So like you said, I'll come back and say, hey, we didn't cover this, or hey, I have this section here, and because it's going to get a little bit longer to expand on this, I want to pull it out into another section. But that's also where those comments come through, and I'm like, hey, I see this as like a slider, or hey, it'd be really cool to have like a pop-up or like a sidebar or whatever, because that lets me see, okay, here's the container and here's how we can expand it or contract it or whatever we need to do. But that level of collaboration, I think, is just not standard in like design and copy. So I think my biggest wish is that like designers find copywriters they love and copywriters find designers they love, and then you guys can work together, because it's the best.
Whatever. I agree.
It is really, really helpful. Yeah.
Okay, big takeaway. Find your copywriter designer duo.
Yep, exactly.
Thanks, Latasha.
Thank you.